So I got up early and I watched The Bubble.
Comedy is tragedy.
Steven Soderbergh, Michael Bay, Judd Apatow. What do they have in common? Yeah, they all made COVID movies. So I got to admit right up front, Judd Apatow may be the most influential filmmaker for me. 40-Year-Old Virgin sort of got me going as a, maybe I could do this kind of thing. Freaks and Geeks, I watched it when it was on, not knowing what it was. Undeclared, I caught much later in life. But yeah, I've always followed Apatow, and I consider his movies to be quite awesome, especially when it comes to comedy, especially when it comes to improvising. He has a very specific way of how he makes his movies, and for the most part, I appreciate it. As I've grown up a little bit, I've found his movies to be kind of long and kind of honestly meandering. I think the real first time I realized that his movies are not perfect was Funny People, because that was his level editor to stand up, and I was doing stand up at the time, so it really interacted with me. But then it was like two movies nose to nose, basically. It was like two separate movies, so you could say it was too long, but you could also say it was just a whole movie and then another whole movie, and somehow he tried to squish them together. So yeah, and that seems to be a thing that he does, is he just makes his movies too long. That I think that's the chief criticism. The other criticisms are it's bro-y, stoner, sort of like surface level comedy. At the end of the day, the guy's consistent. The Bubble happened. If anybody was going to do a comedy about COVID, one of the directors I would trust the most to do it would be Judd Apatow, just because he's so consistent and you sort of know what you're getting. But at the end of the day, you're going to be up against COVID. And the whole world has an experience and or emotional scar that is COVID. And so that's what you're up against when you're making a movie about COVID. Does this movie answer the question, can you get a COVID movie to work? I don't think so. I think it just kicks the can further down the road, honestly. Which might just be because we all have such a specific knowledge of COVID that, and it's not over and time hasn't passed. You can make a comedy about World War II. After World War II, I think works probably better than, while you're in it. But I appreciate the effort, is what I'm saying. The trailer of this movie had me hooked. I was very excited. I was enthusiastic that this would be an interesting take, and it looks like a comedy anyway. And I'll watch any movie Judd Apatow does. I have mixed feelings about the TV shows he produces, but his movies I tend to just watch because I know what I'm getting. It's COVID, If this movie had to exist because it exists on the premise that people are bubbling during COVID, but then again, is it a good movie? I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's long. It's gonna face the same criticisms that any other Apatow movie would face, which I guess is a testament to how consistent of a filmmaker he is. It becomes tedious. The first hour is fantastic. The second hour, I'm not even sure what took place, if I'm being honest. Did it change how I feel about COVID? No. Did it change how I feel about Apatow movies? Not really. Was it a pall against humanity the way I consider the Michael Bay COVID movie to be? Also, no. I mean, credit where credit's due. The actors that were in this movie committed, and it's always great to see Karen Gillan, Keegan-Michael Key, Pedro Pascal, all these, top there. Duchovny was in it as the main character. Awesome. But at the end of the day, this is an indication of the director is the person who really writes the film, and you see that. I don't know, when a movie's premise is everything goes off the rails, you expect things to go off the rails, and then this movie just is incapable of doing that. And I guess I don't know. All right, was the movie a revelation? No. Was it worth spending 2 hours sitting through? All right, here's what I believe, and I fully acknowledge that this is not my place to say because I'm not, making Apatow movies, but I believe in every Apatow movie, however long it is, 2 hours, 2+ hours, there's a perfect timed 80-minute movie in there. I truly believe that. And the toll of the other 40 minutes is just cost of doing business in order to watch an Apatow movie. Do I think that makes for a great movie? No. I don't know. It was so fun. The first hour was just so much fun, and I was just having so much fun. And it was a movie that was aware of how ridiculous it was and how awkward of a situation it is, and sort of, takes the edge off of the whole COVID thing. But then it just keeps going on, which I guess is the experience of COVID. But at the end of the day, comedy was replaced by depression, basically. There was even like a sort of tragic self-aware moment near the end where somebody literally says something like, well, it all depends on the ending of the movie, on whether or not this is going to work. And I was like, you're participating in the ending not working. Like, best I can figure, an improvised movie, which is Apatow's style, is sort of written in the edit. You know, no matter what the script was, no matter what the lines are in the takes, you gotta put those takes together in the edit to make a cohesive story. And for some reason, Judd Apatow's sense of pacing is 40 to 50 minutes longer than what the movie seems to want to be. And that has been the case throughout, I guess. I'm putting this out both as punishment to myself because I didn't finish my movie review of Moonshot yet, but that's going to take time because that movie was actually complicated, whereas this movie, you just, you take it like a shot if the shot takes 2 hours long to shoot. Yeah, I mean, when you line this up with all the other Apatow movies, sure, I think it sits in quite conveniently, but when you call it its own movie, does it actually work? I don't know. Again, the first hour of it was quite good, and I felt like a really good, fresh, take on something that we've all grown stale to, which is the tragedy and the monotony that is COVID. But then there's a whole nother movie that happens that is sort of just like a dark, depressing, like character drama about people stuck in COVID, which is what we're already living with. And so I don't understand what the point of that was, other than to remind us that we're in COVID, which I guess isn't that the opposite of what this kind of movie is supposed to be? It's supposed to, remind us of things that are not COVID. They even talk about in the movie how a movie is an opportunity to distract from the tragedy that is the reality of COVID right now. But then they don't do that. Is it worse than Michael Bay's attempt? No. Is it worse than Steven Soderbergh's attempt with Kimmy? I don't know. That was such a confusing movie. It's hard to say. This movie is exactly what it claims to be, which is just a bunch of self-absorbed actors dealing with COVID. But then it calls to question in its own movie the relatability of actors suffering through what we're all suffering through. And I don't think it came to a good conclusion, because I think the conclusion is we're all suffering, and it's really not a good idea to measure people suffering against each other. I think that's where you alienate each other, because we're all experiencing our own version of suffering. And as soon as you talk about what your journey is, everybody else is going to have a worse story. That's the nature of human suffering, I guess. I don't know. Was it better than nothing? Yeah, absolutely. Was it funny in times? Yes. Did most of the jokes end up in the trailer? Also, yes. Did a bunch of the stuff that was in the trailer not show up in the movie? I'm looking at the poster right now, and the CGI stuff that they have in the poster is not the same stuff that they had in the movie. So I'm a little confused by that. It looks like in the poster it's all like green screens and heads. Remember when the Avengers had Mark Ruffalo with like the big Hulk head behind him? That's what the poster is, but that wasn't what we saw in the movie at all. So I don't know. Should you go on to Netflix and watch this movie? It's a movie on Netflix. You might as well. Is it an upswing in Apatow movies quality, or is it a good meditation on the experience of COVID? Is it a good comedy? I don't regret watching it. I regret that it was 2 hours long. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It was fun to see all these actors. I feel like the only two actors that really got enough screen time to actually be what I considered in the movie is Karen Gillan and David Duchovny. There's like 10 other actors, including Keegan-Michael Key, the dude from all the British stuff that I forget his name. There's a Peter Serafinowicz or whatever his name is in it. Like, there's a ton of people in this movie. Iris Apatow is in it, as you do if you're in an Apatow movie. My brain is constantly, as I'm watching this movie, re-editing this movie, rewriting this movie, because clearly there's characters and scenes that happened, and there's additional material that could have, made this kind of thing, but it just went into like a weird direction where it just kind of like, it was doing this, and doing this, and then like at the halfway point, it's just sort of flatlined, which is Apatow's style, weirdly. The CGI monster dinosaurs, whatever they are, were spectacular, which was the most confusing thing of the whole thing, is because the joke is it's just British dudes wearing like stand-in outfits on wires, hanging around, just having weird conversations, but the actual like CGI that they put it through is quite good. But then there's also the weird disconnect that is nobody on set is seeing the CGI, but we're seeing the CGI as the audience. So that's very confusing because they even called to question, like, so one of the actors says, you know, can we cut? Is this even going to make sense? But we had already seen the CGI and it looked awesome. And so the director's saying, yeah, the CGI will look awesome. But then it's I mean, if you want to make a bowl of popcorn and sit down for 2 hours and sit through an Apatow movie, that's what you're getting. It is going to constantly and irrevocably remind you that it's COVID, which is not something most movies do, which I do think is a minus, but it is the necessary aspect of what this movie is. But short of that, it's, you know, it's kind of funny. It's too long and it's got a bunch of great actors in it that's super fun, but it's an Apatow movie in every way. So if you're not an Apatow fan, this movie is going to grate you so that your eyeballs bleed. If you're an Apatow fan, it's probably going to be fine. I do have a little bit of weird insight in that I've worked on productions in the bubble. Obviously, you know, we all got to go home at the end of the day, but some of the initial stuff about how productions are run during COVID did ring true and did ring, like, the jokes about how inconsistent and just sort of mismanaged and confusing everything is, 100%. But again, does that travel? My instinct is that anytime you try to explain the minutia of Hollywood and sort of how movie sets go, it's not that interesting because it's just kind of mundane. And at the end of the day, it's another job. And this movie sort of spends a lot of time on that in the beginning. I don't know. Is that worthwhile? Does that translate? I honestly, I'm not sure. It's, you know, it's silliness for silliness sake, but it does ring true. I don't know. So I'm on Rotten Tomatoes now, and apparently nobody got to see it ahead of time because everybody's putting out the reviews right now. And it's got a 23% tomato meter and a 36% audience score. So weirdly, the critics and the audience seem to agree that it's not very good, which most of the time, if it's a trash movie, the audience loves it and the critics hate it. Rotten Tomatoes also says it's an hour and 25 minutes, and it's not. It's an hour and 47 minutes, I think. So that was not correct. Yeah, I mean, it also calls into question the whole idea of when studios refuse to let people see the movie ahead of time and give reviews on it. That's usually a sign that the studios already know it's terrible. And so it does seem like that's one of those situations, but it's also Netflix does this thing where they're just like, well, we don't play by your rules, so we're gonna do whatever we want, and so you're gonna have to watch it when it comes out, just like everybody else. Having said that, when I did my Drive to Survive, a lot of the press got the first 8 episodes ahead of time, or the first 6 episodes ahead of time, and so it does seem like they tactfully recognized that it wasn't going to do very well, and so they wanted to not put reviews out until it literally came out at 2 a.m., you know, my time. I don't know. They made a movie during COVID. Everybody got paid, it seems like, and the CGI looks very good. And if that's what you want in a movie, sure. Am I willing to sit through another COVID movie having sat through 2 and then made fun of the Michael Bay one without actually seeing it? I don't think so. It's somewhere somehow somebody's going to figure out a way to make a COVID movie. I think Bo Burnham got really close with his stand-up show, but again, I turned it off after 20 minutes because it was too freaking depressing. So this is sort of a similar situation. You know, like, I'm just frustrated because, you know, at the end of the day, it's an Apatow movie, so he's going to write it, he's going to direct it, he's going to edit it, but there is a much more tighter, more satisfying, funnier movie, smaller, inside of this gargantuan movie. But because he, you know, touches the process the way he does, which I actually have a lot of respect for, it's always going to turn out his way. And so that's like, you can't take the movie away from him, but also it's disappointing that it seems like with, you know, certain adjustments, this movie could have been a lot better, but it's his. I took a 5-hour energy like an hour ago, and I'm just stress sweating, and now I'm like awake, but my brain is not working, and it's like everything's out of focus after like 2 feet. I have a regret.